Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining Philadelphia Magazine's ThinkFest 2021. My name is Kate Dailey. I'm the editor at Philadelphia Magazine. Today, I'm so excited to be speaking with grocery CEO Jeff Brown and Philadelphia Councilperson Maria Quiñones Sánchez. We're going to be discussing unlocking prosperity for all Philadelphians. Before we get started, here's a quick word from one of our sponsors, Bank of America.
Thank you for joining us again for what I know will be an enlightening conversation, unlocking prosperity for all Philadelphians. I'm Jim Dever, President of Bank of America for Greater Philadelphia and proud sponsor of ThinkFest, an event that for years has been bringing together key influencers, community leaders, and business owners to make us think. We have all heard the statistics and know that we rank number one on a list we do not want to top: Philadelphia's ongoing struggle with deep poverty. We know we can change that trajectory, and we have two of the most committed people I can think of here with us today to discuss the work ahead: Jeff Brown and Councilmember Maria Quiñones Sánchez. Jeff Brown, founder and president of Brown Superstores, who tries to find solutions in the private sector through his grocery store chains and innovative nonprofit partnerships. And Councilmember Sánchez, who is the first Latina to hold office in Philadelphia, representing the 7th District, is working to create policies that help uplift all Philadelphians. We look forward to hearing what works from their perspective when it comes to providing equitable access and growth across all of Philadelphia's neighborhoods. I'll now turn it back over to our moderator, Kate Dailey. Thank you for attending and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you to Bank of America and all of our sponsors, including Penn Medicine, St. Joseph's University, Western Governors University, and GoPuff. We're going to be doing these ThinkFest series every day this week at noon and at 4. Please join us. And if you can't join us, please catch up on what we've been discussing at phillymag.com/ThinkFest. All right, well then let's get started. Councilwoman, I wanted to start with you. You gave a speech last summer talking about the difference between the new normal and the old normal. I know the idea of a new normal, especially as we talk about poverty and prosperity and ensuring the future of all Philadelphians, is a recurring theme in your work these days. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that means when you talk about new normal and old normal, and what you want this new normal to look like.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. What we saw during the COVID crisis and even pre-pandemic in neighborhoods such as Kensington was that there wasn't an equitable investment in people, right, and some of the services. And then with COVID, what we saw was the lack of access to whether it was vaccination, testing, or others really cost people's lives. And our recovery was slow, and neighborhoods that I represent had a lot of essential workers who did not have the privilege to work from home and really depended on our septic system, which had its challenges. So, one of the things that I was clear about, that going back to normal where we knew there was inequity was not okay. And then what does the new normal look like? And for council, we adopted what we call the new normal budget. It made some really strategic investments around recovery. And it was more about people versus programs. It was really saying, how do we help people and move them and move their access to some of these vital services that could save their lives. So for us, it was that, and for council, it's really been doubling down on our investments in poverty and getting Philadelphia off that list of being the largest big city with the highest poverty rate.
And do you see that as something that will continue once we do get back to normal, whether it's old normal or new normal? I think people are more focused on these issues right now, and there's more of an effort to want to do something. Do you think we can sustain that attention?
I think we have to double down. I think there's a part of holding people accountable for folks who've been doing a lot of work that we really haven't highlighted and really haven't measured, right? Where we make strategic investments in different programs. And what we've seen is that the world has changed, right? So we can't keep doing the same thing if we're not generating kind of the return on investment. And what we've seen is that as a country, as a society, and even what we've seen as the federal government has invested in big cities, is when you invest in people versus just programs, the return on investment and the impact is felt sooner, right? And you're empowering people when you create more stability, whether that's housing stability, whether that's income stability, or whether that's access to essential services so that essential workers can get back, right? The whole daycare system and women being able to come back to the workforce. So I see us as doubling down on those, but also holding ourselves accountable to not continue to do the same thing if it's no longer effective, and being bold enough to invest and do pilots and things very differently.
Yeah, yeah. Jeff, I know in your business, you have been investing in people for a while. That's a commitment that you made before the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about what you were seeing both in the neighborhoods you serve and in your workforce pre-pandemic, and how the pandemic sort of exacerbated some of these issues that the council person's talking about?
So one of the things we noticed during the pandemic, there was a lot of disruption. One of the disruptions was to public transportation. And it really was difficult for essential workers to get to work. And of course, in Philadelphia, they depend on public transportation. So that was a challenge. Daycare was another challenge. Some people couldn't go to work because their daycare, shut down. And it's interesting, the ripple effect of each thing that we count on not working the way we're accustomed to it working really made this very challenging. Same with our global supply system. I mean, it's still very disrupted. Yeah. So I think there should be a process to look at what we learned and see how we can modernize systems to deal with the next crisis that occurs.
Within your own business, obviously you're at the mercy of the public transportation system. You don't run a daycare, so there's not much you can do about that. But within your own business, how were you forced to respond to some of these challenges around, the needs of your workforce or the needs of your clients when it comes to issues like poverty? And are any of these things that you think could be a long-term solution or a long-term practice?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of good ideas, and let me go through some things. First thing that occurred to us is we need to stay open to serve our customers. And often our food desert stores are in communities that are the most underserved, and they count on us. There isn't like another good option. So the first thing that we did is we had to protect our workers. We couldn't let them get sick. And so I think we went through a series of very rapid enhancements, masks before the CDC said masks, shields, distancing. We had a series of things, like almost every day we were implementing new protections. And 2 years later, about 4% of our workforce got sick with COVID, which is a third of the general population that got sick. And so it really showed me that if you're proactive, you can protect your workers. Once the workers were protected, they could come to work. And you bring up daycare, but one of the interesting things about my labor contract is we have a daycare benefit. And so our workers had daycare, but a lot of times our non-union competitors did not have daycare because they don't have that benefit. And so we found that our workers were coming to work somewhere around 95% showed up for work, compared to some of our competitors, 50%. So if you take care of workers, they'll take care of you. And that's a big learning that even if you don't care about the workers, which they matter a lot to me, I think it's a lot that all of us should learn.
Yeah. Well, no, it echoes what the councilperson said, sort of investing in people, and that pays dividends. Councilperson, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more specifically. Obviously, there has been a lot of temporary support put in place, right? So there's temporary funding from the federal government. There's sort of these ad hoc solutions that both city and industry have come up with. What have you seen from your work of these sort of creative solutions that we had to do very quickly that have really been beneficial and have had a big impact, and sort of prove your theory that investing in people pays off?
Yeah, I mean, I think council acted very quickly with the pandemic. We did an $85 million emergency appropriations. We've been asking all the questions around equity, access, asking the administration to be more accountable, again, around the investment, the return on investment. And so I think, as chair of appropriations, normally I'm the one asking the numbers and saying what is going on here, and how are these investments, how do they help improve the quality of life ultimately for folks. I think everybody now is very well aware that if we don't make the right decisions, we put people at jeopardy, right? And we're only as good as we're doing around how we take care of our most vulnerable. And COVID just really showed the vulnerability of not only our humanity, but also our system. So opening up schools and the importance of having schools open, right? And really challenging ourselves to not say no, but to say how. How do we open up rec centers? How do we open up schools? How do we open up, access centers so that people can go to work, and really push back on this notion that people don't want to come back to work. Instability in transportation, instability in childcare, instability in housing. When you look at the tremendous amount of investment we've made in eviction prevention and keeping people on their homes because it was a matter of life and death. I think what it challenged all of us to say, we can think outside the box and we can force systems to work better together. The eviction crisis that we had pre-COVID, in a COVID world, it was sort of like, how do you work with the court system? How do you work with landlords? And how do we get money to landlords, right? So that they can keep people safely housed. So I think it's provided us the ability to say, this is a bigger picture than sometimes what we're looking at. We can't look at this in silos, but we really, and for people, government is one government, federal government, state government, and local government. So too many times we want to kind of point the finger about what's not happening. I think the federal government came through with a lot of relief. The state got a lot of money. They're still holding on to $7 billion that we hope they will invest in cities like Philadelphia. And even though we have some temporary relief both at the school district and at the city, this next budget will really set the tone about where we're going to be as a city in 2030, not next year, right? But really in 2030, how do we look at a more equitable recovery where we bring workers back downtown? Because if workers come back downtown, that means that they will be people needing jobs to keep restaurants and other things working. And that intersection, right? So that it's not like you're giving preference to one group of workers over the other, but that how everything works together. And I think that global picture or that bigger picture is now part of the conversation as we talk about recovery.
Yeah. I think, around the time that you were talking, started talking about the old normal and new normal, it was summer of last year. We were realizing we were not going to be locked down for 2 weeks. Schools were not going to be closed for 2 weeks. This was a long thing. We didn't see an end. And there was a lot of worst case scenario thinking. And I think appropriately, people raised a lot of alarms that this could be very bad. We have since seen, eviction, like you said, moratoriums. I know Philadelphia has a pretty novel landlord mediation program that's put in place. I know that, Jeff, you were able to do some really innovative work with small businesses to get their products in your stores instead of, restaurants that weren't open and accessible. There are reports that with the money that's coming in from federal relief, people are saving more and paying off more debt. So where would you rate us right now in terms of Philadelphia's outlook on equity? Where are we now compared to where we thought we might be a year ago? And, I guess if you were going to give us a report card grade, what would it be? And Councilperson, we can start with you.
Well, I still think we're kind of like at a C+. I think there's a recognition, when you see the census report and our growth, there's a lot of things there that should inspire us, right? The diversity in our growth, the fact that, folks are living in all parts of the city and diversity is all through the city. But then you see reports around our segregation numbers, and then you say, okay, here is another challenge, right? That we're one of the most segregated cities in the world, and that's not going to change. Policy changes that, investment changes that. So I think that, again, now we can, in a post-COVID, post-social unrest world, we can have these conversations in a more tenseful way without being apologetic about the facts are the facts, right? You don't want to say we have structural racism, but we do. How we invest in government speaks to that, right? And so you can have these conversations differently than we did in a pre-COVID world, in a pre-social unrest world. But then how do you work through that process, right? We're asking the private sector to do more. I'm one that believes that, before we ask the private sector to do something, we as government need to show that we can do that too, right? So that is holding ourselves accountable, our systems accountable, and then just going back to basics. There's some real generic obligations that we have as a city, right? We have to have, good roads. We need a good access to water. We need to be able to pick up our trash. And I think the pandemic showed us that we were frustrated about all of that, and that we couldn't seem to deliver services. And I think that's what people want. People want us to go back to basics, and government needs to do the basic things that it's supposed to do, but it also needs to think boldly about how it invests and how it works with the private sector. We can't recover on our own, right? The eds and meds, having universities open again is hugely important and tied into our economy. What the private sector does in terms of its C-suite and really opening up opportunities for contracting and other things. Again, all of those things are public challenges that we've all made to each other, but the proof will be in the numbers. And we've talked a lot about it. The numbers are not moving in a positive direction yet.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get back into sort of what the obligation of each sectors are before we jump back into that, because you made some really interesting points. Jeff, do you want to talk to me, where are we now compared to where we thought we'd be a year ago? Is it as bad as we thought?
I think it's pretty bad. I think the conversations are good, but the reality is really bad. And it's really bad for the same people that have lived with structural poverty, have lived with structural inequity. And the fact that we're talking about it and we're thinking about it hasn't changed their reality. And, we have bigger changes to make because things are really rough out there.
Do you have any specific examples or stories that you've heard from your workforce or from your customers? I don't want to violate anybody's privacy, but if you can, tell us sort of what you're hearing and how things are bad, I think that would be really helpful.
Well, a lot of people didn't return to work. And I don't think it's that they don't want to return to work. I think their daycare is disrupted. They have a lot of disruptions. And I don't think that problem's fixed yet. So we have work to do. The one good thing is that wages have come up, and that is an opportunity for a lot of our citizens that are underemployed. And the competition for workers is very good. That's a good thing. But what's bad is we don't really have a prepared workforce to take advantage of that. And we're very underdeveloped in our ability to take someone post-graduation or post-school age and really bring them up to speed so they could be successful at work and take advantage of kind of a new norm, which is higher wages.
Yeah.
And so I think we're very, very underdeveloped in that area.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. I'd love for you to hear, obviously, in your work as a private businessman, you have been doing a lot of work in terms of returning citizens, in terms of, wages, daycare, things like that. What do you want to see from the city that would help you with that work? And then what do you want to see from your fellow, business community?
So there's a couple of things from the city I'll start out with. Let's talk about schools for a second. K through 12, I don't know, maybe I look at this differently. I think in the city, something like 20 or 25% of our young people go on to college, which means 75 or 80% do not go on to college. And I really don't think in any way we have a K through 12 system for those young people that don't plan to go to college. And, I think what we need to change is we need a system in which young people are trained when they graduate high school. If they're not going on to college, they will get a job because they're trained for it, which gets them out of poverty. And I think what's happening right now is we are just dumping tens of thousands of kids into poverty every year because we're not training them for work. The second thing, if we miss them in high school, our job's not over because the problem still exists. And we do not have the workforce system to train people post high school how to get some of these good jobs. And I really think we need to reorient our training more around like what we did at Uplift, where you have a caseworker that helps you navigate all the challenges of being successful at work, and in which you learn all the life skills to be successful at work. So I think those are two really big changes from the government standpoint.
Yeah, so you think the training should be a part of the K-12 curriculum or an additional service provided by the city? I guess
I think while they're in high school, we should prepare them for work. We should help them understand what they're good at, what they like, and prepare them to get a $40,000 or $50,000 a year job right out of high school, because those jobs exist today. Today, we don't really have the school system to do that. It's really almost exclusively dedicated to preparing kids for college. It's upside down. That's why 40% of the kids drop out. They live in poverty and they're suffering, and their mom or their dad is suffering, and they don't have a way to make a living to help their family out. And we should change that. That should be a top priority.
Councilperson, do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm chair of education and I've been so for the last couple of years under COVID. I'm a graduate of a career technical education program where I can tell you this huge skills gap that we're talking about is a structural problem as well as it is an investment problem. We really should be talking about 0 to 16. When we start talking about free community college for all, community college is our workforce development arm. And really tying in high school to community college. It is cheaper for us to have a high school junior or senior at community college than it is to have them within our own system. And why aren't we doing that? Because the systems really haven't changed or evolved to what we should be doing to prepare kids for advanced manufacturing, the jobs that we have in our market. I think we're getting better at it. This infrastructure investment gives us an opportunity to really look at that. But I also think that, for the school district, it's been in a crisis mode, and to Dr. Height's credit, we are now in a situation where we have federal money coming in. There is a plan for how do we improve some of the facilities plant for the schools, but we really haven't talked about the curriculum, readdressing the curriculum to what today's new reality, because as people are in crisis, we have gun violence, we have all these situations going on in our school, but that investment and that linkage around a 0 to 16 education system and a continuum system is one that we have not had that big picture conversation, and we absolutely need to use this investment in the federal government to do that.
So it sounds like it's good to hear that it sounds like this is a concrete solution. Sounds like both of you agree on it. But so what has to happen? We've got the investment. How do we go from us talking about this being a good idea to it being a reality? Is it going to take 5 years? Is it going to take 10 years? What's the next
It
step?
should not take us that. Community college is really in line to become a premier community college. Just to give you an example, a good community college is a workforce development arm of the city of Philadelphia, as it should be. Community college is part of the city of Philadelphia, and it should be. What it looks like it has 4 or 5 more campuses, and its offering is more aligned. What it looks like is that the state could invest more money and ensure that these young people that we have in career technical education, that they can go right into community college in their junior and senior year and get the certifications they need around that, again, that skills gap. Having the ability for those systems to say money is not the issue, now it's a systems change, is important. But if community college has to worry about where its budget is coming next year, if the school district has to worry about where its budget is coming next year, they plan for what they have, not for what we need.
Jeff, what do you want to see from the business community? What would you like to see more of?
Well, I have to tell you from my own experience, I have benefited greatly by being a much more open employer. So returning citizens, we've had an effort to help people that are homeless. We've had an effort to help people that have addiction, and people that are different in other ways, like sexual preference. We have been open to that, and we do not have the staffing shortages a lot of other businesses have, because we're open to everybody. And we have a system to take people that aren't quite ready and get them ready for work. And I think businesses really have to be realistic about what the workforce of the future looks like. And it's a lot more diverse. And I have to tell you, if your workforce, like in our 8 stores that serve the city, we're 19% Caucasian, which means we're 81% diverse. And that workforce is welcoming to diverse people. If your workforce is predominantly Caucasian, that's not a welcoming place for everyone. And I think employers really need to step up their focus on this. It's going to be a necessity. They won't be able to operate if they don't do it.
Yeah. As we are seeing these sort of staffing shortages, are you having other business people come to you and say, all right, you're right, tell me the secret? Or, what, again, it's a good idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. How does it happen? How do we get from saying other business should do this, from them doing it and feeling comfortable and having that training?
Well, I've talked to them, like Center City proprietors. I went and I talked to them, and someone said to me, yeah, you're pushing them too hard, but they need to be pushed harder, because they're having trouble running their business because of staffing shortages. They need to open up their thinking to include people they never included. And that would help their business and help society. So that's a change. And you can't do it on your own. The nonprofit sector, who does a lot of the workforce training, they need to be a good partner with customized training for these businesses. That's a change we really need to focus on.
Yeah, I think where Jeff has always been ahead of the game around returning citizens. The reality is part of Philadelphia's poverty rate is tied into the fact that we have 400,000 people with some sort of criminal record. And I know in our work with United Way and the poverty plan, the next push out or build out is how do we get people through cleaning of these records, right? So there's jobs available and many people want to apply for these jobs, but this criminal record prohibits them, right? And so because Jeff has created a space where it's sort of like returning citizens, we want to welcome you and give you a second chance. If businesses don't do that, right, and really look at that workforce and who is out there, we're not going to make progress. But that is our reality, that we have to work ourselves out of it. And that's why criminal justice reform is so key. But you have mothers who can't go into school buildings because they're banned because of their criminal record. That is wrong. And we've created a system that now we have to work ourselves out of.
Yeah, if I could add to the councilperson's comment, we've been 20 years hiring returning citizens. So we have, I think, 36 returning citizens that are now managers. And what we discovered a number of years ago, we like our managers, we want them to experience the American dream. We want them to own their own home. All the things that make a life worth living. And we were finding that they couldn't get a mortgage because they had a criminal record. And so I think it's about 5 years ago, I joined PLSA, Philadelphia Legal Society for Social Equity. I joined the board as the treasurer to scale up their work. And they've done 25,000 expungements since I've been there. And the truth of the matter is that we will not escape poverty unless we have a path to clear up your criminal record. The criminal records have become a life sentence that no one can escape. And the councilperson is completely right. We need to have a much more systematic way when you turn your life around to completely lose that criminal record. And in my company, I have a plan over the next year to do that for all my employees. I plan to hire PLSA to clear all their records because I want them to succeed in life. I want them to own their own home. I don't want them to have 800 privileges they never get back because it's not right.
What are some of the other privileges that they're missing out on?
Well, believe it or not, sometimes they can't even live in public housing. I mean, so where are you supposed to live? I mean, the list is really quite incredible. Like the councilperson talked about, they may not be able to pick their kids up in school. So if your parents can't pick them up in school, how's that going to work? So some of them are very, very, very extreme.
Yeah. So let's, assume that in our audience today, there are some business owners who have been struggling with the labor supply, are looking for workers, hear what you're saying and say, all right, you got me. I'm going to do it. I want to work with returning citizens. I want to expand my pool. What is sort of the first advice you would give them to get started? How do they go from making that mental decision to actually setting up a system that will be beneficial to them and the employees?
So I think the first thing is know-how, which they don't have and they need. And there are great resources in this city to help. And so one example is that,
sorry, when you say they don't have, do you mean the employers or the employees?
The employers don't have the know-how, how to tell what would be a good returning citizen employee because they have their mental state right for success and one who's not quite there. And so an example would be the nonprofit I found at Uplift, which has Uplift Workforce, and it trains returning citizens for businesses. But there's also JEVs. There's a number of nonprofits that are really talented at this. And I would definitely interview 2 or 3 or 4 nonprofits that specialize in this and pick the one you're most comfortable with and, let them help you. And I think you'll build up the muscle or the capacity over time when you do more of it.
Yeah. Now, councilperson, what do you want to see from the business community?
I want to see a real commitment. I put out an editorial, again, as part of this recovery where I challenged businesses and say, the next time I have a conversation with a business person, I want them to tell me who's on their board of directors, who's in their C-suite, and how they changed contracting, right? We saw major corporations during the recovery invest hundreds of millions of dollars, like call themselves out, Netflix, other folks who said, we're going to make this investment. And that's what I want them to do. I want them to say to me, okay, this is not going to, you're not going to go from 0 to 100, but this year you're going to have members of your board of directors. You're going to have members in your C-suite with some sort of lived experience. You're going to have these nonprofit partnerships that we're talking about, right? The nonprofit sector should be your partners. You know, many times businesses look at nonprofits and say, we're going to come and ask you to do all this work. And they're a business too. And it's sort of like, no, let's do an investment that's mutually beneficial, but like call themselves out. And I'd like to see Greater Chamber of Commerce and other folks say, you know, pay, you know, compensation has increased, but publicly making a pledge that every one of their members will be paying $15 to $21 within the next 3 years, that is a goal that they all know they have to reach. I think that becomes more powerful than just being aspirational. And again, so there's been a lot of discussions, but you know, when I ask folks, what are you doing differently, right? And how are you contracting differently? How are you setting those goals from debundling your contracts, right? To making sure that you're buying more locally, right? Too many times, you know, we'll want to say 5 cents for somebody that has to come over the bridge and say that 5 cents is better invested in the city of Philadelphia. So buying locally, ensuring that some of these job specifications that they have is like, do you really need all of these things? I mean, we're still testing for cannabis. We're still testing, like the world has changed and your entry points have not changed. And so, you know, to Jeff's point is like making a decision that you want to be part of the solution means you got to get informed about what that really means and how do you change and operationalize what you're doing so that you do have a welcoming business environment and not one where there's a hostile takeover of like, we're going to change things overnight and it's not welcoming, and that the rest of your employees don't see this as a core value to what you want. And your business will grow. It's been proven over and over. If you bring women and diversity and create that kind of environment, you will get stability and more retention. So there's a return on investment, but it's too easy to steer away from it because it requires you really thinking outside the box.
Jeff, does that make sense to you?
So we in the pandemic, you know, we started the PA 30-day fund, and I was worried that all the small businesses of color would go out of business. And we raised, I think, $3.7 million and funded roughly 1,000 or 1,100 businesses to keep them alive. And, you know, the board would split up the calls to tell the businesses that they've been funded. And when I made my calls to mostly businesses of color in Philadelphia, they would say, Mr. Brown, we know who you are. Is there any chance that we could have a business opportunity to do something with you? And, you know, we started to do that, and it was so overwhelmingly positive that we set up a small business incubator in the business. I hired a person to run it, and we have 150 businesses of color we're working with now. And I have to tell you, I sit with them. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I sit with them and I am so inspired because this is totally the American dream. This is how we correct poverty and all the problems we have. And these entrepreneurs, they're good. They have observations and they see a path and they need a little assistance. So when you talk about contracting, no one could meet a big firm's contracting requirements that's small without some help. And so really what we've done is we've worked with them, mentored them, and helped them so they could build the capacity to serve us. And that is the kind of extra effort you'd have to do. And what I see a lot of big firms doing is they'll write a check, but they're not willing to do what I just said. And I think the council person mentioned that. These small they need to be incubated. They need to be mentored. They don't know about insurance, corporate structures, supply chains, you know, costs and margins, and these things, they need to learn it, but they're not hard things to learn. And I think we could really make a big impact on society if we had a more loving, mentoring approach to these businesses.
That's great. Excellent. Wonderful. Well, so, you know, as we're wrapping up, I wanted to ask you each one last question, which was that if you got to do one thing, in the city, either with the business community or, you know, with the government, with the nonprofit sector, what would be the one thing that you would like to change that you think would make the biggest impact in terms of making this a city where prosperity is available for everyone? And Jeff, if you want to go first, and then we'll let the council person have the last word.
Yeah, the council person talked about us being one of the poorest big cities in the country. which I think that's the problem to solve. But there's a second part of the problem that people don't speak of as much, which is we have among the least amount of businesses per 1,000 people of any major city in the country. That's directly related to our poverty problem. We really have a pretty unfriendly environment for business. And it's particularly difficult for small businesses of color. And I think we really need to take a hard look at that. And some people think it's one or the other, like you're helping people or you're helping businesses. That's not true. You need to help both because you need both for society to function. And our attitude towards business, I'd like to see big changes from the government standpoint.
Yeah. Councilperson, what would you like to see?
Along those lines, it's a leadership moment. It's how do you take all of these structural challenges and provide the leadership necessary so that it gets us to the other place, and you move away from the conversations of winners and losers. Workers from outside the city versus workers inside the city. We are now at a point where we need to have a conversation about the intersection of all of that, right? And then making tough decisions. And sometimes you're making tough decisions that are unpopular but necessary. People, I look at in an electoral position, people elect me to serve them and to do right by them. And sometimes that means I disagree with them because, again, the bigger picture of the intersection around how do we adjust? Making adjustments to a new recovery that's more equitable means people have to get in other people's lanes and we have to be disruptive. And people need to be comfortable being uncomfortable as we get to that space. And for that, it requires a lot of leadership and folks really painting that picture of that intersection about the most vulnerable being well means the city is doing much better. And that means everybody's doing much better.
That's great. Wonderful. Well, that's a really positive note to end on. It sounds like there are a lot of concrete solutions, a lot of agreement. I hope at ThinkFest next year, we're talking about our new community college training program and some of the strides we've seen. But I want to thank you both for taking the time to speak with me. I want to thank you for the work you've both done during this pandemic to ensure that prosperity is available to all Philadelphians. And I want to wish you luck on that in the future.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Look forward to in person next year.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you all.
Thank you.